Flames erupt at the French embassy in Ouagadougou during protests by supporters of Captain Traore in October 2022. Even as darkness falls over Ouagadougou, a spark lights the sky. There is whispered treachery in the air, a plot, a danger lurking just beyond sight. The capital holds its breath. April 16, 2025, Burkina Faso stands on a knife's edge. Will the young captain's revolution survive the night? This is not just one night's drama, but the climax of a long struggle. A struggle between a people reclaiming their destiny and shadowy forces tied to old empires. We delve into how Burkina Faso foiled a coup attempt against its leader, Captain Ibrahim Traore, and how the nation has resisted subversion by neo-colonial interests bent on crushing its spirit. The stage is set. The storm gathers. He was only in his early 30s, a junior officer with a fiery vision. Captain Ibrahim Traore emerged in September 2022 amid chaos. Islamist insurgency raged across Burkina Faso, and a military coup had already overthrown the civilian government earlier that year. The man who seized power then, Paul-Henri Damiba, failed to stem the violence. Disillusionment spread. Enter Traore, bold, blunt, and utterly unyielding. In a dramatic second coup on September 30th, 2022, this young captain rallied fellow soldiers and deposed Damiba. Crowds poured into the streets to celebrate. Many waved Russian flags and torched symbols of French domination, even attacking the French embassy in outrage. Why? They believed France had sheltered the ousted Damiba, plotting a comeback, and they were done with foreign meddling. Traore, the new leader, spoke to their hearts. He promised to reclaim Burkina Faso's dignity, land and sovereignty from both jihadists and the shackles of colonial legacy. Hope was reborn in Ouagadougou. Under Traore's bold leadership, change came swiftly. He cut old ties that many felt were holding the nation back. By January 2023, the junta ordered French troops to withdraw from Burkina Faso, effectively ending France's military role in the country. Decades of French presence gone. Traore declared that Burkinabe forces would be the prime actors in reclaiming their territory. This was more than policy, it was a statement of defiance. He turned eastward for new partnerships, seeking support from non-Western allies. We have turned to strategic allies like Russia and Turkey, Traore announced, warning that a foreign coalition was working against Burkina Faso. To his followers, he became a new Sankara. Invoking the spirit of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's legendary revolutionary who stood up to imperialism decades ago. Pride and optimism surged, but so did the alarm bells among those who had long benefited from Burkina Faso's subservience. Yet, with hope came danger. Traore's rise threatened powerful interests, terrorist warlords, profiteers of instability, and yes, the old colonial powers and their local collaborators. They watched this young captain with unease. A leader who kicks out French troops and burns bridges with France. In the eyes of the old guard, this was intolerable. Plans began to form in the shadows. Burkina Faso had declared independence in more than name, and those who clung to the old order were not going to sit idly by. Unbeknownst to Traore, his defiance had painted a target on his back. The storm was gathering, and the first rumblings of thunder were about to be heard. The first betrayal came quickly. Barely 2 months after Traore took power, whispers of a coup plot surfaced in December 2022. Imagine a 34-year-old captain, fresh in power, already stalked by traitors. Lieutenant Colonel Emmanuel Zongrana, a high-ranking officer, was accused of scheming to overthrow the new regime. Traore's government claimed they thwarted this plot before it could erupt. Many details remained shrouded, but the message was clear. Enemies within the army ranks were testing the waters. Traore responded in stride. He reshuffled key posts, removed suspect commanders, and tightened his inner circle. The young captain would not be caught off guard again so easily. Still, the conspiracies did not stop. Over the next year, discontented elements and old regime loyalists continued to scheme in the shadows. They saw Traore's bold changes, cutting off France, allying with Russia, empowering local volunteers against jihadists, as dangerous disruptions of the status quo. Each move he made towards independence only hardened their resolve to undo him. Inside barracks and in exile abroad, they plotted. In mid-2023, intelligence hinted at more subversive networks at play. Traore's government spoke of umpteenth attempts to destabilize the country. Foreign intelligence agencies, regional power brokers. No one can be ruled out. The struggle for Burkina Faso's soul had only just begun, and Traore's enemies were regrouping. By late 2023, the tension was palpable. Rumors swirled of disloyal officers and foreign agents conspiring together. But Traore had something his adversaries did not: the fervent support of the Burkinabe people. Across cities and villages, ordinary citizens were vigilant. They had tasted the idea of true sovereignty and refused to let it be snatched away. When any hint of a coup arose, people mobilized. In fact, on one fateful night, September 26, 2023, pro-Traore activists sounded the alarm on social media. A coup might be underway. Immediately, hundreds of Traore's supporters, calling themselves guardians of the transition, poured into the streets of Ouagadougou to defend the revolution. They banged pots, blew whistles, and chanted into the darkness. In secondary cities like Bobo-Dioulasso and Gawa, similar rallies erupted in solidarity. That night, the people themselves became Traore's line of defense. Picture the scene: midnight in Ouagadougou. Throngs of youth gathering outside the presidential residence, their faces lit by phone screens and determined fire. They are chanting Traore's name, vowing never again to foreign puppets. Meanwhile, in the barracks, a handful of officers move to execute their plan, but it is already unraveling. Loyalist intelligence agents have been listening, watching. With the crowd swelling outside and word of the plot leaked, the conspirators lose their nerve. By dawn of September 27, 2023, the government strikes. Traore security units move swiftly, arresting 4 senior military officers for an attempted coup. 2 others flee and go into hiding. The junta announces on national TV that the coup attempt has been foiled. Relief washes over the nation. In Ouagadougou's downtown, a few anti-Traore protesters who had dared to appear that morning melt away when they see the public outrage. Once again, Burkina Faso's destiny stays in the people's hands. But the war is not over. It's only just starting. If anything, the enemies of the transition are now more enraged. They retreat into the shadows to plot their next move, as Burkina Faso celebrates yet another narrow escape. But ask yourselves, who was really behind these traitorous officers? Who whispered encouragement into their ears? For some of the arrested, their motives were part personal, frustration over resources rivalries. Yet, as investigations progressed, a darker picture emerged, external strings being pulled. The traitors were not acting alone. They were pawns in a larger game orchestrated beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The nation braced itself. Bigger battles lay ahead, and next time, the conspirators might not act so clumsily. The September 2023 coup attempt had been crushed, but it revealed a critical truth. Burkina Faso's people would not sit idle and let their fate be decided by conspirators. Those midnight rallies in Ouagadougou were a turning point. They proved that Traore's revolution had a heartbeat in the streets. From that night on, any would-be plotter knew the public could rise at a moment's notice. This grassroots vigilance likely saved Traore's government in 2023. It wouldn't be the last time. In the ensuing months, every rumor of destabilization was met with public demonstrations of support for the junta. Thousands gathered in the capital and other cities to denounce destabilization desires by internal traitors or foreign agents. In one mass rally, outraged demonstrators even burned the French tricolor and the EU flag in a fiery show of rejection of outside interference. The message was unmistakable. Burkina Faso would stand tall and resist any attempt, internal or external, to return it to the days of subservience. Captain Traore understood the power of this popular support. He met frequently with community leaders, youth groups, and volunteer fighters, urging vigilance. In televised addresses, he spoke plainly about the threats facing the nation. "There is a coalition against us," he warned, hinting at foreign hands stirring trouble. He urged Burkinabe to stay alert and united. Each speech was peppered with resolve and a hint of defiance, rallying the populace as the collective guardians of the transition. This cinematic standoff, a nation on edge, a leader under siege, and a people awakened, captured the imagination of Africa and the world. Burkina Faso's courage began inspiring others across the continent who yearned to break free from neo-colonial influence. But as 2024 dawned, the conspirators adapted. They saw that overt military putches might be foiled by vigilance, so they grew more cunning. Reports emerged of secret meetings in foreign capitals, of money and weapons changing hands across borders. In January 2024, authorities uncovered yet another coup plot, this one scheduled for January 14th. It was described officially as the umpteenth attempt at destabilization, a telling phrase that hinted at just how relentless these efforts had become. Several military and civilian figures were arrested in the nick of time. The pattern was clear: a hydra of coup attempts, one head rising as soon as another was cut off. Each time, Burkina's security forces, likely aided by pro-Traore informants, managed to stay one step ahead. But how long could their luck hold? The enemy was learning, regrouping, and growing more dangerous. As the junta tightened internal security, a new front was opening abroad. Concrete evidence began to surface that some neighboring countries were harboring the architects of these plots. All eyes turned to Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. In fact, officials in Ouagadougou accused ex-President Damiba, the very man Traore had ousted, of scheming from exile and coordinating with allies in Ivory Coast. It was a stunning revelation. A former leader of Burkina Faso allegedly colluding with a foreign host to retake power. The Burkinabe government formally asked Ivory Coast to extradite certain political and military figures accused of plotting against Captain Traore. But the requests were flatly refused. This diplomatic snub spoke volumes. Was Ivory Coast shielding Traore's enemies? To Traore's supporters, the answer was obvious. Ivory Coast's president, Alassane Ouattara, was a known ally of France, the very embodiment of the old Francophilic order. Under Ouattara, Ivory Coast had grown ever closer to Paris, economically and militarily. So if conspirators against Burkina's anti-colonial government were seeking refuge anywhere, it made perfect sense they'd be in Abidjan. The battle lines of a broader confrontation were being drawn: revolutionary Burkina Faso vs. the guardians of the old empire. By 2024, Burkina Faso was under siege on multiple fronts. On another front, economic pressures and sanctions loomed. Burkina had been suspended from ECOWAS, the West African bloc, after the coups. But perhaps the most insidious threat came from political intrigue. Beyond Burkina's borders, neighbors and international players who saw Traore's government as a threat to the established order. Côte d'Ivoire emerged as a chief antagonist. Ouagadougou openly accused Abidjan of hosting operation centers dedicated to destabilizing Burkina. It wasn't just Damiba allegedly plotting there. Intelligence indicated a network of Burkinabe deserters and mercenaries coordinating under the protection of powerful patrons. Mahamadou Sana, Burkina's security minister, went on national TV to reveal startling details. The masterminds of coup Traore were all housed in the neighboring country Ivory Coast. According to intercepted communications, these exiled plotters were working hand in glove with terrorist groups, feeding them information on Burkina's defenses to incite chaos. The ultimate goal? To sow total chaos and force Burkina Faso under the tutelage of an international organization. In other words, they wanted to create such havoc that foreign powers or the UN would step in and effectively end Burkina's independent course. It was nothing short of a plan for neocolonial re-enslavement. In Ivory Coast, under President Ouattara, a man deeply aligned with France, appeared complicit. Burkina Faso's strained relations with Ivory Coast were part of a bigger regional rift. In 2023, a watershed event further polarized West Africa, the coup in Niger, July 2023. Niger's military, inspired in part by Mali and Burkina Faso's defiance, overthrew its Western allied president. This set off a diplomatic firestorm. ECOWAS, led by Nigeria and strongly backed by France and other Western powers, threatened military intervention to reverse the Niger coup. Who were the loudest voices calling to restore the ousted pro-French president of Niger? None other than Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu and Ivory Coast's President Ouattara. Tinubu, as ECOWAS chair, declared that no option is off the table, including force to reinstate Niger's deposed leader. Ouattara went even further, branding Niger's new rulers as terrorists. These putschists must go, he proclaimed bluntly, even volunteering Ivorian troops for an ECOWAS intervention. It was a clear alignment with the interests of France, which has major stakes in Niger's uranium and had troops stationed there. And where did Burkina Faso stand in the Niger crisis? Firmly against foreign intervention. Traore and Mali's leader Assimi Goïta jointly warned that any attack on Niger would be considered a declaration of war on Burkina Faso and Mali. The lines were stark. On one side, Nigeria and Ivory Coast acting as enforcers of the old colonial influence under the ECOWAS banner. On the other, Burkina Faso and Mali forming a defensive pact with Niger, determined to protect their hard-won sovereignty. In effect, a new anti-colonial bloc was coalescing in the Sahel, with Burkina Faso at its heart. Traore even signed the Liptako-Guruma Charter with Mali and Niger in late 2023, creating an alliance to mutual defense, a bold step of unity against external meddling. This was a direct affront to France's and its allies' dominance in the region. All these events painted a larger picture. The coup attempts against Traore were not isolated whims of ambitious soldiers. They were pieces of a grand chess match between those who wanted Africa to remain under the old neo-colonial yoke and those fighting to break free. Unlike Nigeria, whose president is best friends with England, or Ivory Coast with France, Burkina Faso stands tall. Burkina Faso was refusing to kneel before former colonial masters, and thus becoming a prime target for their intrigue. The stakes could not be higher. Every passing month, the Traore stayed in power was a beacon to other African nations, a sign that it was possible to defy the great powers and live to tell the tale. This made the forces arrayed against him only more determined to make an example of Burkina Faso. If they could topple Traore, they would snuff out that beacon of hope. By early 2025, an uneasy calm settled over Ouagadougou. Traore himself, in public speeches, cautioned the nation that the enemy was patient and very active even if unseen. They are stateless, but we will await them firmly and be merciless, he vowed, in a rare flash of anger. These strong words from the usually measured captain sent a chill and a thrill through the populace. A warning that something big was brewing, and a promise that Burkina Faso would not go down without a fight. Citizens organized neighborhood watches, soldiers drilled for emergency response, and intelligence units monitored communications day and night. The country was on high alert. It felt like the quiet before a storm everyone knew was coming. As March 2025 rolled into April, the sense of an impending showdown intensified. Unbeknownst to the public, Burkinabe intelligence had started picking up fragments of a terrifying plan. Intercepted messages, double agents, and informants all pointed to something big, a coordinated strike to decapitate the Traore regime. This wasn't to be a simple mutiny or a lone wolf assassin. It was far more elaborate. Bits of information came together like pieces of a dark puzzle. The plan involved renegade soldiers, hidden arms caches, and even jihadist militants working in tandem. It was a conspiracy that reached from the bush to the heart of the capital, and beyond Burkina's borders to that familiar haven of schemers, Ivory Coast. The date was set, April 16, 2025. On that day, while unsuspecting civilians went about their lives, the conspirators intended to unleash chaos. According to later revelations, their strategy was multi-pronged. Diversion through terror. In the early hours, jihadist fighters allied with the plotters would launch large-scale terrorist attacks in multiple provinces. Bombings, village raids, road ambushes, anything to spread the security forces thin and sow panic. Infiltration. As attention turned to the terror attacks, soldiers recruited by the enemies of the nation would position themselves for the main strike in the capital. Some were insiders on duty. Others clandestine units smuggled in wearing Burkinabe uniforms. They had spent weeks studying guard rotations, gate security, and alarm systems around the presidential palace. Assault on the presidency. At the height of the confusion, these conspirators planned to swarm the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. Their goal was simple and chilling: capture or eliminate Captain Ibrahim Traore and the top leadership in one fell swoop. Perhaps they intended to stage it as a swift coup rescue operation, presenting themselves as saviors restoring order after the terror attacks they themselves incited. Seize power and invite intervention. With Traore out of the picture, the plotters would seize power at least in the capital. Then, as claimed by Burkina's security minister, they intended to place the country under the supervision of an international authority. In practice, that might mean inviting a foreign peacekeeping force, or ECOWAS troops to intervene, ostensibly to stabilize Burkina Faso amid the chaos they had created. In effect, it would be a handover of the country back into the hands of external powers, crushing the revolutionary experiment. This nefarious plan was unprecedented in scope. Never before had Burkina Faso faced such a coordinated internal-external threat. The involvement of terrorist groups, the very jihadists that Traore had been fighting, showed how far the conspirators were willing to go. They were ready to burn their country to the ground if it meant dethroning Traore. This was the final gambit of those colonial-linked forces, using Burkina Faso's security nightmare, the jihadist insurgency, as a cover and catalyst for a coup. It was diabolical in concept and might have succeeded, if not for a stroke of vigilance and luck. In late March 2025, Burkina's intelligence service intercepted a critical exchange. A trusted military officer, or so everyone thought, was communicating via encrypted messages with known leaders of a terrorist brigade. The content was damning. Detailed information about the deployment of Burkina's special forces, maps of weak points in Ouagadougou's defenses, and an eerily specific discussion of D-Day, April 16th. The officer was essentially betraying troop positions to facilitate a surprise attack. This was the smoking gun. Imagine the astonishment and fury among Traore's inner circle as they read these intercepts. A high-ranking Burkinabe officer had sold his soul to terrorists and foreign schemers. The enemies of the nation that Traore spoke of were not an abstraction, they had names and ranks, and some wore the same uniform as him. Armed with this intelligence, the Burkinabe security apparatus moved with urgency and stealth. Throughout early April, they quietly rounded up individuals suspected in the plot. Every arrest had to be handled delicately, too early or too obvious, and they might spook other conspirators into hiding or launching the plan prematurely. Several junior officers and even a colonel were detained for interrogation. Crucially, a manhunt was launched for the key military double-crosser who had leaked the defense plans. He was identified as Captain René Ouedraogo, one of the plot's central military organizers. But when authorities went to grab him, he had vanished, fled the country, presumably to Ivory Coast where the puppet masters waited. April 15, 2025, the eve of the planned coup, was a day of palpable tension in government circles. Traore and his loyalists finalized their contingency plans. They discreetly reinforced the presidential guard and redeployed units to protect key installations in the capital, all under the guise of routine anti-terror drills. The general public still had no idea. Announcing the threat might only create panic or tip off the plotters. Through it all, Captain Traore remained a picture of calm determination, at least outwardly. Those close to him later recounted that he barely slept that night, preferring to stand watch in the operations room, eyes on the surveillance feeds, waiting for the traitors to show their hand. Dawn, April 16, 2025. The day Burkina Faso's enemies had chosen to ignite total chaos arrived with an eerie stillness. In the cool morning air, most citizens went about their routines, opening shops, tending fields, unaware of the storm about to break. But in certain corners of the country, the silence was shattered. Minutes later, gunmen assaulted a military convoy on a rural highway. By sunrise, reports flooded into the capital, terrorist attacks in multiple provinces nearly simultaneously. This was the diversion the plotters had planned, now in motion. Normally, such a morning of terror might have triggered panic at the highest levels, but this time the government was prepared. Traore's junta played along, issuing orders for rapid response units to deploy to the affected areas, yet holding enough elite forces in reserve, anticipating the true danger was still to come. Mid-morning in Ouagadougou, an unnatural tension hung in the air. Armed checkpoints popped up on major roads leading to the presidential quarter. Unbeknownst to the public, many of these checkpoint soldiers were Traore's most loyal men, donning regular uniforms to blend in. They were on the lookout for anything suspicious, convoys of soldiers out of position, rogue units moving without orders. The conspirators had hoped to slip into the city's heart amid the distraction of terrorist chaos. Instead, they found the capital far from distracted. It was on high alert. As the clock ticked toward noon, a likely 0 hour for the coup assault, something unexpected happened. State radio broadcast a terse announcement. Several military personnel had been arrested for endangering state security, and investigations were ongoing. Those few words hit like a thunderclap in certain circles. It was a prearranged signal. Traore's government was effectively saying to the plotters, "We see you. It's over." Immediately, one segment of the conspiracy unraveled. A group of soldiers who had mustered at an outskirt barracks, supposedly to reinforce the city, disbanded and fled upon hearing the radio news. Their commanders realized the plan was blown. In downtown Ouagadougou, security forces loyal to the junta swooped in on a safe house, detaining 2 officers found with detailed maps of the presidential grounds and radio jammers. Burkina Faso had sprung the trap on the trappers. However, the danger was not entirely past. A convoy of armed vehicles, led by a rogue lieutenant, was already en route inside the city, under the pretense of responding to the terror attacks. They did not yet know their cover was blown. As they approached the presidential palace from the west, they encountered a checkpoint that was not on their original plan. The guards, Traore loyalists, asked for the night's code word. The nervous would-be coup leader in the convoy gave the wrong answer. In that charged moment, guns were drawn. A firefight erupted in broad daylight, startling residents nearby. The renegade convoy, realizing the ambush, attempted to force its way through. But within minutes, armored units from the palace garrison arrived, boxing them in. After a brief but intense clash, the rogue soldiers surrendered, their plan in tatters. The assault on the presidency had been stopped cold. By late afternoon on April 16th, it was clear that the coup attempt had failed spectacularly. Security Minister Mahamadou Sana went on national television, this time with a tone of grim triumph, to spell out what had happened. He recounted how communications between a high-ranking officer and terrorist leaders were intercepted, foiling a major plot. He named individuals: Captain René Ouedraogo, still on the run, Lieutenant Abdrahmane Barry and Commander Johnny Compour, ex-officers hiding in Ivory Coast, and others who had been caught. Crucially, he directly accused Côte d'Ivoire's government of sheltering the coup's ringleaders. The evidence was overwhelming and was now being broadcast for the world to see. The foiled April 16th plot, Sana explained, aimed to sow total chaos and place the country under the supervision of an international organization. In other words, the plan was to undo everything Burkina Faso had fought for and drag it back under foreign control. But Burkina Faso's vigilance and refusal to bow had prevailed. Captain Traore appeared last on TV that night, calm and resolute, flanked by dozens of military officers in a show of unity. In a short address, he praised the security forces and the people's unwavering support. He delivered a warning to those who would betray the nation. Although stateless, the enemies of the nation are very active. We will await them firmly and be merciless. The words "now Saran sans pity, we will be merciless," echoed across the airwaves, a stark message that any future plotters would meet an unforgiving fate. Outside, in the capital's streets, crowds that had initially been confused by the midday skirmish now gathered to celebrate. Youth on motorcycles waved the flag, women ululated from balconies, and chants of Traore, Traore, rang out. In scenes reminiscent of previous rallies, some burned French flags yet again, while others held up portraits of Thomas Sankara and Ibrahim Traore side by side. The symbolism was rich. The spirit of Sankara, the Pan-African hero assassinated in 1987, lives on in Traore's resistance to imperialism. As night fell on April 16, 2025, Burkina Faso stood unbroken. Against all odds, a grand conspiracy financed and abetted by powerful forces had been dismantled. The terrorists who had attacked that morning melted back into the bush, having failed to spark the intended uprising. Many were later hunted down in joint operations, according to the army. In Abidjan, Ivory Coast's government issued perfunctory denials of involvement. But their words rang hollow given the concrete accusations and prior evidence of sheltering plotters. Across Africa, news of Traore's survival and the foiled coup spread like wildfire. From Mali to Niger to Guinea, people who had been watching Burkina's experiment with hope felt a surge of pride and relief. The young captain had weathered the storm. April 16, 2025 will be remembered in Burkina Faso's history as the day the nation refused to be broken. The aftermath of the foiled coup attempt solidified Captain Ibrahim Traore's stature as a symbol of resilience and Pan-African resistance. In the weeks that followed, his government took bold steps to reinforce this victory. Dozens of officers and civilians implicated in the plot were put on trial for treason. Some fled abroad and remained fugitives, but their betrayal only emboldened those who remained loyal. Traore initiated a sweeping purge of the military to remove any lingering moles. At the same time, he reached out to the populace with humility and resolve. "It is your vigilance that saved our motherland," he told crowds at a rally in Ouagadougou, "and it is your strength that gives us strength." The bond between the leadership and the citizens, already strong, became virtually unshakable after defeating such a grave threat together. Across Africa, a narrative was crystallizing. In one corner, Burkina Faso stands tall, unyielding in its quest for true sovereignty. In other corners, sadly, some leaders still dance to the tunes of their former colonial masters. The contrast could not be more dramatic. Unlike Nigeria, whose president is best friends with England, or Ivory Coast, whose leader courts the favor of France, Burkina Faso has chosen a different path. The path of dignity and self-determination. This tiny, landlocked country, among the world's poorest, dared to say no to the might of empires. And when those empires and their local proxies attempted to sabotage Burkina Faso through coups and chaos, the upright people of this nation lived up to their name. They stood upright and fought back. Let's pause and reflect. How often do we witness an African country openly defy the old colonial powers and succeed, even if only for a time? How often do we hear of ordinary citizens thwarting a coup with their courage, or a young leader risking everything to reject puppet strings? Burkina Faso's story under Traore is cinematic and inspiring precisely because it is so rare and significant. It recalls the dreams of leaders like Patrice Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral, and Thomas Sankara, dreams that were cut short by imperial machinations. Yet here, in the 21st century, that dream flickers alive again in Ouagadougou. The victory on April 16th was not just Traore's victory, it was Africa's victory. It showed that even in an era where powerful interests still try to dictate the destiny of African nations, a united people can preserve their chosen path. When Captain Traore and his comrades stare down threats, they do so with the confidence that millions have their back, not only in Burkina, but across the continent. Social media in Africa buzzed with celebratory posts. Burkina Faso, the land of the upright people, indeed stands upright. Road activists from Ghana. In Lagos and Abuja, some Nigerians, frustrated with their own government's subservience, tweeted admiringly about Burkina's fearless stance. "We need a Traore," they said wistfully. Even in Francophone countries like Senegal and Ivory Coast, young people quietly cheered Burkina Faso for defying what they saw as French neo-colonial influence. Of course, challenges remain enormous. The jihadist insurgency is still a bleeding wound. The economy is strained. Isolation on the international stage has costs. Traore has promised elections by July 2025 initially, though many suspect the timeline may extend given security concerns. The long-term fate of this experiment is uncertain. But what is certain is the sense of restored pride among Burkinabe. The idea that we take our destiny in our own hands has sunk deep into the national psyche. They have paid for it in blood and sweat, and nearly lost everything in the struggle, but they have held on. As this narrative arc comes to a close, picture one final powerful image. A massive crowd in Place de la Nation in Ouagadougou, gathered at dusk, a week after the foiled coup. The sky is streaked with the warm colors of sunset. On a large outdoor stage, Captain Ibrahim Traore stands at a podium, flanked by traditional chiefs, imams, priests, and youth leaders. A united Burkina Faso. He raises a hand to silence the roaring crowd. "We do not kneel," he declares, voice booming. "Not to terrorists, not to traitors, not to anyone. We only kneel to pray to God and to honor our martyrs. Burkina Faso will remain free by the grace of our people's courage." The crowd erupts in thunderous approval. Flags wave, the red and green of Burkina, and interestingly, not a single foreign flag this time. Candles are lit in memory of those lost in the struggle. There is a feeling in the air of something inevitable and unstoppable. The awakening of a people. Burkina Faso has foiled the coup and foiled the neo-colonialists. Its story sends a message reverberating far beyond its borders. When a nation stands up for itself, it can overcome even the mightiest of obstacles. The fight is far from over. Enemies will surely try again. But tonight, as our journey ends, we leave Burkina Faso standing proud and unbowed. A young captain at the helm. A flag fluttering defiantly in the Sahelian breeze. And a hopeful populace chanting into the night. Long live Burkina Faso. Long live African freedom. Please do well to subscribe. Pan-African Rebellion is an independent media company, telling the stories of Africa with honesty and independence, serving the African interest. Subscribing helps us reach the masses.